that you can all hear me? Can you just give me a quick hi, yes, I can hear you, or yeah? Brilliant. All right, good. That's lots of yeses. That's what I like to hear. Okay, first of all, huge thank you to everyone for coming, and I'm so excited to see how many different countries we've got represented today. I'm really impressed with all the people from Latin and South America who must be very early in the morning for you. And it's really lovely. So thank you. And I hope my main hope for this talk is just that it's helpful and it's useful. And at the end of the hour, you can go away thinking, great, I've got a couple of good ideas. I can take those into the classroom. That's what I'd like to help with today. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box. I will try and answer them. I might not be able to answer any of them, but I will do my best. So please just ask away, and I will be expecting some answers from you to questions as well. So you can't just sit there and fall asleep. You're going to have to pay attention. All right, so my talk today is called The Creative Classroom. So what do I mean by that? I mean a place where your teenagers can really feel inspired, where they really feel like they want to learn, they're engaged, they're interested, they're included, they're encouraged. And I think that's something that we can all create. I think of the classroom, it's like a launch pad, and you're ready to launch your teenagers out into the real world. So how can we go about and create that? Well, I think the first thing you have to do whenever you're thinking about your classroom and whenever you're thinking about your teaching is to start off by thinking about your learners, your students. And what do we know about teenagers? Well, I consider myself a little bit of an expert on teenagers now because I've written for teenagers for many, many years. I've taught teenagers and I have 2 teenage daughters. So I have very real experience of teenagers, and they can be an absolute joy and a wonderful thing to have around you, and they can also be hugely challenging. I think we all know that. I think I'd like to start off by looking at some of those challenges and thinking how maybe we can think of them more as opportunities. Okay, so let's look at one example. Teenagers are moody. Yeah, do you recognize that? Are you all aware of the fact that some teenagers in your classrooms can sometimes just come in and they're like, don't want to be here today, want to be somewhere else, not interested, not engaged. Yeah, it's very common, isn't it? So yeah, teenage can be moody. But then let's think about the flip side of that. The flip side is they can change. They can change from moody to smiley really quite quickly. They can, if you can find something to hook them in, you can get them on your side. So yes, they're moody, but moody means they can change mood. So that's a good thing. All right, what about another thing I think you might recognize? They're addicted to their phones. True? I think it's probably true. I know I find that with my own children and with students. You have to say to them, come on, put the phones away, switch them off. You can live without your phone. It doesn't matter if someone posts something on social media and you miss it for the next 40 minutes. And they find that very difficult because they're addicted to their phones. Okay, so that's maybe a negative. But again, let's look at the flip side. What's the flip side of that? The flip side is they're digitally competent, and that can be very useful. I know I find it very useful just because I use my teenagers to help me actually work out how gadgets actually work. So if I can't get something to work, my teenage students and my teenage children are often much better at helping me. I'm glad to see some people are saying that their teenagers can't bring and use phones in their school, which is great. But different schools have different rules, so it's good to think of advantages and disadvantages. So that's the advantage. They're addicted to their phones, but they're digitally competent, and that's a really useful thing. Okay, let's think of another disadvantage. They challenge authority. Yeah, this is the kind of age they are. They're reaching towards independence. They're growing up, and they're beginning to say, "Now, come on, I want to make these decisions myself. I want to do this. I'm not going to do what you're doing. You're saying." So they're challenging authority. So what can we say about that? Well, okay, maybe they're challenging authority, but they're preparing for independence. It's kind of important that they do challenge authority because at some point they're going to be trying to make decisions for themselves. So again, I can see that as a positive as well as a challenge. All right. And finally, They can seem disconnected with the real world and bored. True, yeah? Well, then we might complain that they come across as bored in the classroom and disconnected with the real world. But again, I think the flip side of that is that if we can find something in the real world that really, really engages them and gets them interested, then suddenly they're the most engaged people there. They're so enthusiastic, they're so committed. So it's just a matter of trying to flip it. And I think that the way that we can flip it is by making our classroom into a creative classroom, so that instead of them just thinking, oh, this is irrelevant, this has got nothing to do with me, I'm not interested, they think, wow, yes, I really want to get involved. And when they start feeling like that, they can be the most amazing students because they can be so enthusiastic and committed. So what's going on with our teenage students? Why do you think they behave like that? Well, they're making a transition from being a child to an adult. And it's a fast-moving world, and they're getting information from everywhere. They're kind of getting overloaded with all this information. Yeah? And they're visibly changing. They're growing, so they've got to deal with that as well. And there are things that happen inside them too. And some of the things that happen inside them are happening in their brain. So there's one very interesting thing that happens in the teenage brain. And it has a real impact on the way that they behave in the classroom. And I think it also has an impact on the way that we should be teaching them. You see, different parts of the brain develop at different times. So let's have a look. Right. You look at my nice little diagram here, and you can see the blue thing that looks like a sausage is the frontal or prefrontal cortex. And the red bit is the limbic system. Okay, so these are different parts of the brain, and they grow and they mature as we grow and mature. Now, the prefrontal cortex, the blue bit, that's the bit that is the logical part of your brain. So that's the bit that organizes information. It makes you think before you do something. It helps you to remember facts. And then we have the limbic system, and that's the red part. Now, the limbic system is the one that is the emotional part of your brain. Okay, so that's the one that makes you feel angry or sad, gives you emotions and gives you feelings. Now, when we're adults, the blue bit, the frontal or prefrontal cortex, it controls the emotional part. And that means that that's what stops you going mad every time you get angry, or it's what stops you rushing out into a road in front of a car because you've seen something interesting on the other side. Okay, so as adults, we're in control of our emotions most of the time. Yeah, but with teenagers, the brain's developing at a different speed. So that emotional thing, the emotional part, the limbic system, is growing, but the frontal or prefrontal cortex hasn't fully developed yet. So what happens is that they have all these emotions and they just can't control them. And that's what you see in the classroom. Okay, so what you're seeing is students who are trying to deal with those emotional feelings, but they haven't really got developed their prefrontal cortex to try and control that. Now, evolutionary terms, there's a very good reason for that, because when animals get to a kind of adolescent stage, that's when they're about to leave their parents and their family, and they're about to go into the real world. And because of that, they need to be very brave, and they need to be daring, and they don't need to hold back. But it's quite different for our teenagers because we're not ready to let them completely out into the real world yet, and we'd like them to be a bit more rational and a bit more logical. So what can we do? Okay, what can we do in the classroom to try and deal with that? I think what we can do is really try and grab their interest, get that emotional part of them connected so that they feel emotionally involved and interested and they want to take part in the lesson. All right, so it's sometimes difficult to appeal to their logical side, so try and appeal to the side of them that's going to think, wow, this is so interesting. All right, so how can we do that? Well, I think the way that we can do that is by making our classroom creative and active. So what's active learning? Active learning is when students start to take responsibility for their own learning. Okay, so rather than just sitting there and absorbing what we say, the students become the creators of the lesson. They help to feed the dynamic and ultimately they achieve the aims. So if you can see in this diagram here, passive learners just sit and receive information and active learners think for themselves. Passive learners follow instructions. active learners question and discuss. Passive learners listen to explanations. Active learners produce their own responses. And we have to change as teachers as well, because we've got to stop being the kind of teacher that just stands there and goes, blah, 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 listen to me, listen to me, listen to me. And you've got to be what we call, instead of the sage on the stage, the guide on the side. So you've got to move over a bit and get the students really involved. And sometimes that can be a bit scary, but it really pays back, because once they start to be active learners, they remember more and they feel more engaged. And the other thing is, and I'm going to be mentioning this a few times, is you then get what I call a virtuous circle. So you might have heard of a virtuous circle, and that's a situation where students are getting involved, they're learning more. Because they're learning more, they feel really good about it. Because they feel good about it, they get involved even more and they learn even more. And once you can get them into that virtuous circle, it's fantastic, because then they start to be really genuinely active learners. Okay, so this is not new information. I mean, there might be new research now telling us all this kind of stuff, but actually, you know, however many years ago it was, let me just check on my notes, 2,500 years ago, Confucius said, "I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand." And I think that's a really great little quote, just to remind us of how important it is to get your students really involved, to get them doing, instead of just being the passive learners and the passive listeners. Right, so I'm going to give you some ideas about how to make your classroom active, creative, interesting, and where you're really getting your students involved. And we're going to start with beginnings, challenging beginnings. And I could also just tell you that I've also just done a blog about beginnings called Brilliant Beginnings. I've just done that blog for National Geographic, so you could check that out at the end of this webinar. There are some more ideas in there. But yeah, I think beginnings are really important. I think what is kind of disastrous is if you start your class by saying, "Hi everyone, sit down, turn to page 47, let's have a look at what we're going to do today." You know, your students are already asleep. You've got to do something to get them straight in there, really engaged, challenge them, right? Get them to try and think of something. So let me give you an example. I love to use images. I love to use really great, exciting pictures. So let's have a look at a picture. Right. Now this is where I get to check whether you're still listening, because I'm going to ask you some questions now, all right? So I want you to have a look at this picture, and here are my questions, and just type your answers. Where is this? Do you want to make some guesses as to where this is? Mexico, Peru, Cuba, Mexico, Brazil. Oh, we're very much heading towards one area of the world. It's really interesting that so many of you have immediately thought that it's somewhere in Latin or South America. Because you're absolutely right, it's Mexico. Very good. Okay, my next question is, why are the houses painted like this? What do you think? Why do you think the houses are painted like this? Promote tourism in a slum, city art, gay village, tradition, brighten up their neighborhood. Okay. All right, so it looks nice. So actually, this was in Las Palmitas in Pachuca, Mexico, and I apologize to any Mexican teachers for my poor pronunciation. And this was an artists collective, and they spent 14 months painting this amazing mural on the walls of 200 houses. And it was, as some people guessed, this was a kind of slum area. It was a working class barrio, and they wanted to transform it into something beautiful and something that brought color and hope into people's lives. So it wasn't really tourism, it was really about trying to transform the lives of the people who were living there. And the guy who directed this, the project director, is called Enrique Gomez, and he's actually an ex-gang member, and he wanted to bring the community together. So they helped to work on the design, they helped to paint it. So it's an amazing image of hope and community coming together and working together. So my final question would be, would you want your house to be painted like this? How do you feel? Do you want to give me a yes or a no? Yes? Of course, no. Yeah, a few people saying no. I think I've got about, I'm going to guess it's about 60% yes and about 40% no. Depends on my wife. That's a very good answer. Yeah. Okay, so you can use this information to introduce a lesson where you're talking about maybe vocabulary for towns and cities, for houses, even furniture in houses. You could perhaps be introducing a lesson about art or about poverty or about crime. So all sorts of ways that you could use this picture to introduce a lesson. But the thing is, it has an impact. It has an instant impact. And you're instantly asking the students to express themselves, not just to guess what the picture's about, but to tell you their opinion. What do they think of it? Would they want their house to be painted like that? So that's what's really important about using an image. Don't just use an image and say, what words can you use to describe it? But get students to challenge them to try and guess something about it and then ask for their own personal opinions. All right, let's think of another way of challenging students. I'm going to show you another picture. I'm going to ask you a question. Right, if you were to see these five objects, would you like to guess what theme links them all? What do you think the theme of my lesson is going to be when I show you these pictures? Technology, marine biology? Yeah, someone's got it already. You're very fast. You're very good. Blade Runner, I like that. It's robots. Yeah, they're all robots. So I don't know if you know, let me see if I can get my little pointy thing working here. Oh, there it is. Exciting. So this is, I've got it written down here. This is called the Da Vinci surgical system. So this is actually used to perform operations on people. This one you might know. Do you know what this is? I'd love one of these. Yeah, it's a Roomba. Yeah, it's like a robot vacuum cleaner. Sounds amazing. This one is a marine, what's it called? A Seawolf underwater robot operated vehicle. That's what that is. So that is operated under the water to look at things that we can't get to. This one is, does anyone know what this is? Any guesses? Anyone who can see the images? It's not Mars rover. Yeah, it's bomb disposal. Yep, that one's for bomb disposal. And this one now, has anyone seen this before? This little thing which looks like he doesn't really fit with all the others. You're absolutely right. Some people have said to give old people companionship, and I think I noticed that we had a few visitors from Japan because this is the Parobot, this is called, and this originally came up in Japan, and it is a robotic baby seal, but it responds to people talking, and it's used a lot with children and with elderly people with dementia to make them just feel safe and comfortable and happy. So, and it's very, very effective. So that's one way that you can use this activity to introduce a lesson on technology or specifically on robots. And don't forget that you're always going to ask a question like, what do you think? Would you like to own a pet robot? Or would you like to have a robot cleaning your carpets? Or would you be happy about a robot doing an operation on you? So that's another way that you can challenge your students. But you don't always have to use pictorial images. So you don't always have to use images. You can use other ways of making images. So here's something I've done. Now this is from a very neat little neat little app or a website that you can go to, which is called Word Cloud. So if you Google Word Cloud, you could find that fairly easily, and it's completely free. And what you do is you take a text, you copy all the words in the text, you put it into this little program, and it makes this lovely word cloud for you. So I'm just going to move my cursor. That's better. Right. Okay. So it makes this lovely word cloud for you, and the words, the size of the words relate to how many times those words appear in the text. So it's a really nice image, fun image for students to look at, but also then you can say to them, well, what do you think this text is going to be about? So would you like to make a guess? Have a look at those words. What do you think the text that you're going to read is going to be about? About Josh? Yes, certainly going to be about someone called Josh. Any other ideas from what the words that you see? A chess player named Josh. Yeah. Josh in a chess championship. Yeah. You've got the main idea. I don't know if anyone here has heard of this guy. He's called Josh. Oh, I can never pronounce his surname. It's very difficult. Here we are. His name is Josh Whiteskin. All right. Has anyone heard of this guy? Yeah, someone said mindset growth mindset. That's absolutely what he's associated with. Yeah, he was a chess champion. So he was one of these. He was walking through Washington Park when he was 6 years old or something. Saw some old guys playing chess. Sat down, started to learn with them. Turned into this chess genius. So he was a chess genius. And then one day he did really, really well. And then one day he didn't win his match. And he said, in retrospect, he said that was the most important, the best thing that ever happened to him. Because what it taught him was, you're not born with talent, right? You have to work at it. And if you do work at it, you can get better. And if you don't work at it, there will be a point at which you don't get better. And that was really, really useful for him. So that's what he learned. I'm really sorry, by the way, if some people aren't able to see the picture. I think Emily is trying to sort it out, so she's probably going to give you some advice. So I want to talk to you a bit about growth mindset because I think it's really, really interesting. And I think it's an important message that we can share with our students, which is that, you know, sometimes it can be very demoralizing for students because they can think, well, I'm just not good at that. I'm just no good. I can't do it. You know, other people are much better than me and I can't do it. And that's an easy trap to fall into. And what really you want your students to get to realize is that they can always improve if they work hard. If they work, they will improve. It absolutely will happen. And it's like I said before about the virtuous circle, once they start to understand that, then they can feel that failure is just a way for them to discover what they need to work at rather than telling them that they didn't do something. It's more like, right, so this is what I really need to work at. And it's very difficult to make that turn that key in students' minds, but that's what growth mindset is all about, and I think that's really important. And actually I have an example from a completely different area of my life, because when I don't write books and give webinars and look after my kids and sometimes teach English, I teach something else as well. I teach this. Do you know what this is? Can you see this? Does anyone know what this is called? It's called a recorder. That's right. Okay, this is a recorder. Lots of kids learn this. It's like the most basic, simple instrument to learn. And I go into a primary school near where I live and I teach it to some 7 and 8-year-old kids. So I have a little club. I have 15 kids in my class, right? And I've done this for the last 7 years. So I start my club. I've just started it. It starts in September at the beginning of term. And I walk into my classroom. I've got 15 7-year-olds sitting there all ready to learn. I could probably teach 60-year-olds as well, but my experience is teaching 7-year-olds, right? So they're sitting there. And it's always really, really interesting, that first class, because of those 15 kids, you will have this experience with all your students. When you start a new class, you walk in and you make assumptions about kids, don't you? You think, okay, of those 15 kids, maybe 4 or 5 have already learning another instrument, and they already understand, and they can just pick up their recorder, and they've got their hands in the right place. Yeah? And then you've got some 7-year-olds who are just crawling on the floor and not remotely interested, and you've got some who try and play with their nose, and you've got some who are so tiny their fingers can't even cover the holes. And it's very easy as a teacher and for those kids to think, you know what, those ones are really good. They're going to be brilliant because they can already do it. They can pick up their recorder and they can play a beat instantly. They're going to be great. And those kids, they're not going to be great because they can't do anything. They can't even get their fingers on the holes. They can't even sit straight on their chair. But the reality is, if you get them connected, if you get them interested, and if you get them wanting to learn, the ones by the end of that term who will be good will simply be the ones who've practiced. That's all it is. They will be the ones who've practiced. And if they practice hard enough, they will get better. And as soon as they start to get better, they go so excited, they practice even harder and they get even better. And you cannot tell in that first class who's going to be good and who isn't going to be good. And that's what you need to get your students to understand, right? However much they may think, I'm no good at languages, I can't do it. If they practice and if they work hard, they will get better. So how do you get them practicing and working hard? Okay, right, I got slightly distracted, so I apologize for that. All right. But we've talked about challenging beginnings. So let's talk about something else that's really interesting, because someone's just in the chat has said how to encourage a student who's afraid to speak or who's shy. And that's interesting because my next point is going to be about discussion and debate. Right. So how do we get kids to discuss and debate things? And it comes back to this idea of personalization, yeah, of making your students feel that they are really worth something and their opinions count. Not just in English, but just generally in life. It's a really important 21st century skill, getting students able to talk and feeling that what they're saying is worth it. So just simply going back to that text about Josh and the growth mindset, well, we can think about some discussion things at school which bring it back to themselves, right? So instead of just talking about the text, like what does this text mean? What's the meaning of these words? Instead of just doing comprehension, make it really personal for them. Think of a subject at school which is difficult for you. How can you improve? Share ideas for ways to practice. Or do you think people are born with natural abilities for certain things? Why or why not? And mindset affects all of us. What do you think this means? Can you think of some examples in real life? So bringing it back to themselves and their lives and making it really relevant is very important. And again, we can use images. Okay, so if you want to get your students involved and discussing, not disgusted, but discussing things, then you're going to using an image is a really effective way of getting them immediately to start talking about something. So we saw before when we looked at those pictures of the houses, that was something they could have started talking about, whether they wanted their house to be like this. This picture is amazing. This is a climber called Alex Honnold, who's kind of the rock star of climbing. Yeah, that's what he's known as. In this picture, he's standing on a ledge about 500 meters high on the northwest face of Half Dome in Yosemite. And he says, apparently, when you're climbing well, the fear is not there. That's what he says. I'll take his word for it because I'm not about to go up and stand on that ledge and find out for myself. So what kind of interesting discussion points can we take out from this? Well, I had a little search around. This is an image from Impact, actually. It's from our book, and it's in a whole unit about risk and facing fears and learning not to panic and natural disasters and doing dangerous things. But when I was doing the research for that, I was just generally researching around the picture. I wanted to find out more. And in one of our one of our national newspapers, I found that they had used exactly the same picture. And it was quite interesting to see the comments below that people had made. And these are real comments from people in this newspaper. One person says, this man is a hero. One person says he's either very brave or very stupid. And this guy says he's an attention-seeking idiot who will probably have to be rescued, putting other people into danger. So that's really interesting because it's three different points of view. Someone thinks he's amazing, someone thinks he's an idiot, and someone's not quite sure. And that's a great way of just getting students, you know, even if they don't want to talk, they can just decide which one of those they agree with and then perhaps give one or two reasons why. So that's just one way that you can get students talking. Here are some other ideas. So how else can we encourage discussion and debate? Okay, engage students' interest in the subject, really important. Try and find subjects that interest them, get them engaged in it right from the beginning. Reacting positively. Even if students say something that doesn't seem to make sense, that you completely disagree with, that personally you think is, not the brightest thing in the world, you can still react really positively. And, going back to my recorder club, if I have a kid and they're really no good at all, but they want to show me that they've done something, even if it's awful, I'm going to go, that is amazing, because I can really tell that you've practiced and I'm so impressed. And next time, if you could just try and next time put your fingers over the holes when you blow, it will be even better, but it's still fantastic. So reacting positively, really important. Allow the students to be the experts. This is something that really works. Find out what your students are interested in, because you'll probably have a student in your class who knows a lot about cars. Maybe someone knows a lot about DC or Marvel comics. Maybe you've got a student who knows loads about, I don't know, technology, gadgets. There's going to be something that they're interested in. And if you give them space in the classroom occasionally to be the expert and to tell everyone else about it, and not to be the person who can't do it, but to be the person that knows all about it, that's amazingly empowering and motivating. Holding classroom votes. Well, this is a great way to get students feeling like their voice is being heard, even if they don't want to speak. So if you can just have something and say, put your hands up if you agree, or actually doing a tick or writing a sentence on a piece of paper, that's one way of just getting students to feel engaged, and then you can go on to encourage more discussion. But holding classroom vote is a very simple way. Taking the focus off accuracy. Discussion and debate is not a time to be super accurate. It doesn't really matter. There are other times in the class when they're writing, when they're answering questions about reading passages. That's when you have to say you need to be accurate. When there's discussion and debate, the important thing is to get them talking and getting them involved. So you can take notes and go back to it later with ideas for how to improve, but while they're actually discussing and debating, take the focus off accuracy. Okay. So we've talked about challenging beginnings. We've just talked about discussion and debate. And now we're going to talk about the real world, because again, I think this is something that's very, very important and that I think can really motivate your students. And that's if they think that what they're looking at and what they're talking about is actually relevant. Excuse me. So let's go back to Alex Honnold. Do you remember the guy on the ledge? There he is. All right. So we'll go back to Alex Honnold. Here's an interesting thing about the real world. You look at that picture and you just think it's an amazing picture, and you probably think about the guy standing on the ledge and what it's like for him and what you might feel like standing on the ledge. But there's another question to ask there as well, and I think it's a really important one today, which is, well, who took that picture? How did they take that picture? Because that's not easy either. Yeah, Emily, we're about to start playing the video in about 10 seconds, so it might be good. I'm just about to start playing a video to you guys, and it's going to buffer for a bit, so don't panic if it doesn't immediately work. Not quite yet, Emily, sorry. Okay, sorry, apologies. Yeah, in just a few seconds, I'm going to start playing a video. So I was talking about, do we think about who actually takes this picture? Well, I can tell you who took this picture, and it was a guy called Jimmy Chin. And he's a legend as well, because he not only climbs the same kind of things that Alex climbs, although he does use ropes, which Alex doesn't. He not only manages to climb, but he does it carrying a ton of equipment and cameras and video cameras, and then he hangs from ropes and takes photographs. And I think that's really, really interesting, because it makes them think about the story behind the picture, which is so important. So let's find out a little bit about Jimmy Chin, and you're going to see some footage of what he had to do to take those photos. Thank you, Emily. Okay, don't panic because it's buffering, but it will start working again in a sec. Hopefully.
Ultimately, like, the process of climbing is very rewarding to people. It's very difficult physically, but it's also a very kind of cerebral sport. It's slow and methodical, and you have to think. You can't move very well when you're scared. You have to be able to kind of control that fear and maintain your breathing. There's very real consequences when you make mistakes. You make a wrong move when you're free soloing and you fall hundreds or thousands of feet and die.
Okay, great, thank you. So I think that's really interesting. That was just a video that I found looking through the National Geographic videos on YouTube, because he's a National Geographic explorer. So yeah, someone's just saying, where are these videos from? That's a little clip I took, but if you were to Google something like Jimmy Chin Yosemite, you would find that on YouTube, and then you can clip that. And it's just very interesting because, like I said, it tells the students the real story behind the photograph. And I do think that's really, really important, particularly, nowadays when you've got so much information everywhere and a lot of it is false or photoshopped or possibly manipulated in some way. So getting students to question it is so important, I think. So what would you do then? Well, as I said before, we want to get our students discussing and debating. So you might then get them to relate that back to their own lives and to think about things and to discuss them. So some questions. Think of a dangerous situation that you've experienced. Were you prepared? Were you in control? Explain. Or think of an adventure you'd like to experience. Would it be dangerous? What risks are there? What should you do to prepare? Name 3 things. So they're thinking about the real world. They're looking about an example from the real world, which may seem very, very alien to their own experience. They might think, well, I'm never going to climb a ledge or photograph someone climbing a ledge. But then you're bringing it back to their lives. So you're getting them to think about how the real world is related to them. And that's really important. And that's one of the things that I think really helps to motivate students. So I mentioned just a few minutes ago that in today's society, with social media everywhere, it's sometimes very difficult to know which information is true and which information isn't true. And I think when we're preparing our students for the real world, we really need to get them to question that. So another image that I like to use is this one. Okay, has anyone seen this? Have you come across this before on the internet, on social media, on Facebook, anything like that? Some people are saying they have. Is it a giant squid? Looks fake. Okay. Who thinks it's real? You think it looks fake? Yeah. Some people think it's real. So it is fake. It is fake, but I think it's yummy. Okay. It is fake, but it's very interesting because loads of people were fooled by this. The story was, it circulated social media. It had hashtags like radioactive gigantism and giant sea creature. And the story was that the squid had been washed ashore on the beach of Santa Monica, and it had grown to this size because of the radiation from Fukushima. That was the story. Okay, so you could ask your students to look at something like this and think about whether it's true or not. And how could they check to find out it's true? And do they check to find out that it's true? And why do things like this go viral? Because it's not very difficult actually to find out that this is a fake. You just need to do the research. So what happened was, we had this picture. This is the original picture. This is a real giant squid, so it's quite big, but it's nothing like as big as the one in the previous picture. This is a real giant squid, and it washed ashore in Spain. All right. And then we have this picture. This is a dead whale in Chile. Okay. So someone did some very clever Photoshop, and they put together the giant squid from Spain in place of the whale in Chile, and then they just told everyone that it was a giant squid in Santa Monica. So it's really clever. If you go back to that picture, you can see how cleverly they've changed it. So it's a perfect way of getting your students to use things like it could be, it might be, I think it is, it's probably, it definitely can't be. You know, it's a fantastic way to get them to use that kind of language. And it's also a real way because they're doing something that's actually really useful because you're making them think about stuff that they see online and question it and think about the reality behind it. I think it's also interesting as well because it's just fun talking about giant sea squids. All right, so just to remind you, we've talked about challenging beginnings, we've talked about discussion and debate, and we've talked about using real-world topics. There's something else that I think is very, very important, and particularly for this age group, and that is giving choice. Because teenagers so often think they don't have any choice, right? They don't have any choice about whether they go to school. They don't have any choice about whether they do their homework or not. When they get home, they have terrible parents like me making them do things like unload the dishwasher. They have no choice about when they go to bed. So, you know, life's a complete tragedy for most teenagers if you listen to them talking because of how little choice they have. Yeah. So where you can, give them some choice, even if it's only a tiny bit of choice. Yeah. And someone's just asked if students should be allowed to do research on their mobiles. I think it would be an engaging thing. I would let them do that myself. Yeah. But maybe just only have certain safe sites that you let them go to. So giving choice. How can we give choice? There are lots of ways that we can give choice in the classroom. Here are some ideas. Even if you get students to think about whether they'd like to practice something in pairs or individually or in groups, right? That's choice. Some students really prefer to work on their own. Other students much prefer to work in groups. Some people might have friends that they really want to work with. So where you can, get them to make their own choices about how they practice something. You know, not everything always has to come from you. In terms of production, when they produce something, perhaps they might want to do something where they speak it, or they might want to write it, or they might want to do something more graphic. Obviously, there are written things that they all have to learn to do. But where you can, give them some choice. And with revision as well, you know, they might prefer to use worksheets. They might prefer to revise by using listening texts. They might prefer to revise by working with a partner. So there are all sorts of ways that we can give choice in the classroom. So let me give you another example. If you remember our picture of Alex Honnold standing on the ledge again, and I said to you that this was from a unit that's all about disasters, taking risks, not panicking. So we've looked at natural disasters, and then here's a way that we can give the students some choice. So work independently, make a list of natural disasters that threaten your area. Think about how to prepare for each one. Share your ideas with the class. Or, if you prefer, work in pairs. Choose a natural disaster. Create a poster to educate people about what to do if this type of disaster strikes. Or 3, work in groups. Find out about a recent natural disaster. Prepare a short presentation to tell your class what happened. So you're giving them some choice, and that's really important because, as I said, it makes them feel more involved, and it makes them feel like, well, they're allowed to make some kind of decision in their lives. So another way that you can give choice is by using project work, and I think project work can be very, very effective in the classroom if it's managed in the right way. So here are some examples of project work that we could use. So again, this is from the same unit in Impact. It's the unit where we looked at Jimmy Chin, we looked at Alex Honnold on his ledge, Then we looked at natural disasters, so it's all about risk and not panicking. And then students can choose one of 3 possible projects. And this will appeal to different kinds of students, because you have some students who might really enjoy showing off in front of their classmates and love acting, and they could choose A, which is write and perform a skit. So you choose a natural disaster, find out about the best ways to handle it, and then you can write a dialogue between a safety worker and a person that they're helping to prevent or prepare for disaster. And then they prepare their skit for the class. So that's something that students who really, like being up there in front of the class and like talking, that would be perfect for them. Or you might have other students that are really much happier with very visual things. They really enjoy drawing. They're a bit shy about talking. So they could do something like create a comic strip. So find out about an explorer and adventurer who survived in a dangerous situation, think about the key events, and create a comic strip. So as long as that comic strip has got some speech bubbles, they're still doing some English, they're still using their language, but they're doing it in a way that really appeals to them and to their learning style. And then finally, for the students that may be a bit more reserved, a bit quieter, and actually quite enjoy getting things right and writing things, they could write a news article. So go online, read about animals that have helped to save human lives, choose your favorite story, research some more information, and then write a newspaper article summarizing the story and include a photograph in your article. So I think projects are just a brilliant way of really appealing to those different kinds of learners, letting them choose how they want to produce their work, and really making them feel like they have some kind of say in what goes on in the classroom. Because as I've said before, I think that's so important, that they don't feel that they always have to do everything that they're told, that they feel engaged and they feel involved. Sorry about my throat. Okay, so let me just sum up what we've gone through today. We've talked about the creative classroom. We've talked about using challenging beginnings, for example, the images, the picture of the houses. There was the different pictures of the types of robots. There was the word cloud with all the words from the article about growth mindset. So challenging beginnings. That's a way to get your students instantly involved and instantly listening to you and making decisions. Then we've talked about discussion and debate, really important for students to feel that their voice is being heard, and getting them involved, getting them talking to one another. So that's a really important part of the creative classroom, is discussion and debate. Then we talked about using real world contexts and real world content. So wherever possible, try and talk about the real facts of life, things that are happening, get them questioning what they see out there, get them learning about how to do research. Those are really important 21st century skills, both inside the English language classroom and anywhere in their life. You're going to be giving them a really good education if you talk to them about questioning things and thinking about things. And then finally, give choice, which is incredibly motivating. And once again, I'm going to remind you about the virtuous circle, which is this thing where once you've got your students hooked and you've got them into that circle and they understand that if they work and they get involved, they're going to go better. And as soon as they start improving and they start seeing how they're improving, they're going to want to work even harder. That's what you want to aim for. You want to aim for that virtuous circle. And I think if you try and incorporate these 4 things into your classroom, then I really hope that you can end up with a creative classroom where your students feel empowered and interested and engaged. So I hope that those have been useful ideas for you. As Emily said, this is being recorded, so I think it's going to be available for you to look at again. I am always available if you want to ask me any questions. I think I think you might have seen my email up there. You can definitely get in touch with me through National Geographic. I'm very, very happy always to answer questions. And yeah, we have a little bit of time for questions and answers now. So if you have any specific questions that you think I might be able to answer, please ask away, because we've got about 7 or 8 minutes now, and I'm very happy to answer more questions. And also, if while you're possibly typing out questions, can I just remind you that we have my blog as well, which is called Brilliant Beginnings, and that's on the In Focus. If you go to the National Geographic Learning website and have a look at the In Focus blog, it was just published yesterday, and there are some more ideas there about ways that you can begin your class. So please check that out, and I'm going to be adding I think about once a month I'm going to be adding another blog, so and they'll just be full of ideas for teenagers. So people are talking about drawing teenage know-alls into the class. Well, I think that's a good thing. Just get them talking about their own area of expertise, and I think that's really useful. But as I said, everyone in your class there's going to be something they know all about. There's going to be something they will be a know-all about. So as long as you involve all students, I don't think that being a know-all is a bad thing. I think that's a good thing. How to avoid them talking in their mother tongue. I mean, that is really tricky. And I think sometimes you should allow them to, yeah? Because when at the beginning of a class, when you just want to get them really interested in the subject, I think that's okay. I think you have to decide when are the points in your class when using their native language is acceptable and when it's not acceptable. And if you can make that very clear to them, then I think that they will appreciate that. I think if you're really tough and you say, right, absolutely no, whatever their first language is, absolutely no Polish at all, I don't want to hear a word of Polish in this lesson, well, I think that starts off quite negative. And I think you want to positively reinforce every time you hear English rather than be negative about every time you hear the first language. And that will have a very positive effect. Boys are reluctant to write, and English is a second language, so hard to write. What are the suggestions? I would find ways that they can write that maybe doesn't feel like writing to them. For example, doing a comic strip is a great example, where you are getting them to write, but because they're doing a comic strip, it might not feel quite so much like writing. Also giving a framework, giving a structure, giving guidance so that it doesn't feel quite so scary. I think that's a good way to encourage writing. So if students feel like the blank page is a terrifying thing, and as a writer I know that, there's nothing more scary than seeing a great big blank page in front of you, well, start off by just giving them gaps to fill and then gradually increase those gaps. Okay. Yeah, I don't think there are any more questions there. If you have any more questions, I am very happy to give you my ideas. How can we deal with very shy students who are totally blocked and they don't want to talk or only use yes or no? It is really tricky. It is really tricky. I think if you can get them to be in small groups, then it's less scary than having to talk in front of the whole class. So maybe for them, something like pair work or very small group work will be their opportunity to make their voice known. You also might find that they might be happier to record something and then play it to the class. So if you have that opportunity, like you can say to them, okay, you're a bit scared about making a presentation to the class, but what you can do is you can record your presentation at home and then you can just play it to the class. That's like a halfway point where it's not quite so scary. So I think that's one way that you can encourage students who are worried about talking out in front of the class. I'd love to know what the Seven Hats game is. What is the Seven Hats game? Someone's just mentioned that and I've never heard of it. Oh, somebody offers sweets that are rewards for class participation. Yeah, now I did that actually with my recorder club, but it all went horribly wrong because then they started to get to the point where, well, I think you can probably imagine what the problem might be if you're sucking sweets and trying to play the recorder at the same time. It really didn't work. So just be aware of the fact that if you're using sweets, that doing a lot of speaking and production might not work terribly well at the same time. I see what the Seven Hats thing is. Well, that sounds very interesting. how can you make classes motivating when you're preparing for international exams? So I think that is very tricky, and it depends what the exam is. But I guess some of their motivation should be actually passing the exam. So you would hope that that might motivate them. But otherwise, I think, you know, whatever they're preparing for, there can't be anything wrong with just practicing using English in real contexts, using the real world. So even if it's not directly related to their exams, if you can find something that interests them, their English will improve and they will be better prepared for the exam. So I would have thought that would work. Do you have any course books by National Geographic for teenagers? Yes, we do. There's a course called Impact. I'm one of the authors of Impact. Please check it out. Maybe Emily can provide a link to the National Geographic learning page for Impact. I'm very biased. I think it's a wonderful book. Hold on. Impact. There it is. This is our new National Geographic course for teenagers. Check it out. Okay. All right, Emily, I think my voice is just about to go. I don't think I can talk anymore, and I'm sure you've heard enough of me. So thank you so much for all your really, really interesting questions, for your engagement, for participating today. It was amazing to see you all turning up from different places around the world. I'm so sorry if I haven't managed to respond to everyone, but I've done my best. I'm going to hand over to Emily now. Thank you again. Bye-bye. I can't hear you, Emily.
Can you hear me now? I'm sorry, the microphone button wasn't clicked on my headset. I was just saying thank you so much, Kath, for today, and thank you everyone for joining us. It was a great webinar. I found it very interesting and informative. As Kath mentioned, many of the examples today were from National Geographic Learning's Impact.